There are moments in life when anguish seems to take over everything. That feeling that tightens your chest, steals your sleep, and makes your soul feel tired, without strength, without direction. Sometimes we try to pretend that everything is fine, but inside the heart screams in silence, searching for answers that seem not to come. We ask ourselves why things don't change, why God remains silent, or why our faith feels like it's fading. And it's right there, in the middle of that darkness, where true learning begins, learning to trust even when we don't understand. Because trusting in God isn't easy, but it is the most powerful way to free the soul from anguish. Today I want to talk to you about something profound, something that can completely transform the way you face trials. Learning to trust God, not only when everything is going well, but when you see no way out, when pain seems greater than hope, when your mind tells you that you can't go on, but your spirit still whispers for you to keep believing. Because there, dear listener, is where faith reveals its true power. Before continuing, I invite you to support this message by giving it a like, sharing it, and leaving a comment. Doing so not only helps this video reach more people who are also going through difficult times, but it may also be the reason someone finds hope today. YouTube recommends this type of content more when you interact with it, and that means you could be an instrument of blessing for others. I invite you to write this phrase of faith in the comments. I trust in you, Lord. Write it from your heart and as a declaration of trust, as an act of faith that opens the way to inner peace. Part 1. Understanding anguish and learning to truly trust. Anguish is like a wave that arrives without permission, flooding the mind with repetitive thoughts and pressing the chest with that weight that refuses to let go. It is not weakness, it is a signal, a warning from the heart saying that we are carrying alone what was never meant to be carried without God. Trusting in God does not mean denying pain or pretending everything is fine. It means learning to shift the weight of the soul from our shoulders to the hands of the Father, step by step with intention and daily practice, not giving up, but choosing to trust. That is why, in this first part, we will understand what anguish really is in the light of faith, why it clings to us, and how to make room for trust in God until we feel real relief. First, let's look at the root. Anguish grows when we try to control what we cannot, and when we view the future through the lens of fear. The mind runs ahead and builds catastrophic scenarios, and the heart responds with a constant state of alertness. But faith retrains our perspective, teaching us to interpret reality through God's presence and not through the absence of immediate solutions. In the Bible, we see men and women who also felt anguish yet learned to rest. The psalmist declares that God sustains our burdens every day, and the apostle teaches us to cast all anxiety upon him because he cares for us. When we stop believing we are alone, anguish loses its strongest argument. Now let's understand something fundamental. Trust is not an emotion. It's a decision rooted in who God is. Emotions fluctuate, the decision remains firm. Biblical trust has 3 pillars we can strengthen each day. One is believing that God is good and that his plans seek our eternal good, even when they hurt in the present. Another is believing that God is wise, that he sees what we cannot, and that is why his timing and ways rarely align with our urgency. And it also works to believe that God is powerful, not limited by what limits us. When these convictions become habits of the soul, anguish begins to lose its strength. It also helps greatly to retrain your thinking. Faith does not cancel reason, it purifies it. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, the word teaches us to replace worry with a conscious dialogue with God, promising peace that guards heart and mind. Practically speaking, every time an anxious thought appears, you can do something simple. First, name it plainly. I'm afraid of losing this. I fear I won't make it. I'm worried about what's coming. Then present it to God exactly as it is, without masks, because he loves truth in the innermost being. Finally, replace it with a concrete biblical truth. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or he will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in him. Repeating this practice again and again trains your mind to think with faith, not fear. Another powerful way to begin healing anguish is by caring for your body, Anguish also manifests physically: short breath, tense shoulders, clenched jaw. God created us as whole beings, and when the body is on alert, the mind accelerates too. Try this. Straighten your posture, lower your shoulders, breathe deeply, counting to 4, hold gently, and exhale slowly. While doing this, repeat a truth like, "Lord, my path is in your hands," or "Jesus, I rest in your faithfulness." This isn't an empty technique, it's aligning body and faith, allowing outer calm to reflect inner trust. You can also create a daily space to cultivate trust. Trust isn't improvised when everything falls apart, it's trained daily. Dedicate a few minutes to gratitude, to releasing what you can't control, and to meditating on the Word. For example, start by thanking God for 3 small things, then imagine placing your worries in His hands, and end by repeating a verse that fills you with hope. You can use Isaiah chapter 26 verse 3, John chapter 14 verse 27, or Psalm 55 verse 22. These truths not only calm the mind, but strengthen the spirit. Another practice that transforms anguish is changing the question that feeds fear. We often ask, what if it goes wrong? What if I don't make it? What if I fail? Change that question to a perspective of faith. What if God opens a door I didn't see? What if He gives me the strength I don't have today? What if His plan is better than mine, even if it hurts now? When you change the direction of your thoughts, your soul also changes course. It's also important to respect boundaries. Trusting in God doesn't mean folding your arms, but recognizing what belongs to you and what belongs only to Him. Do what you can with love and surrender, but rest in what you cannot control. Jesus taught us to live one day at a time because tomorrow will take care of itself. Living today with God is the best way to find peace amid chaos. Another very powerful way to overcome anguish is not isolating yourself. Anguish tends to isolate, to make us believe no one understands what we feel. But that's not true. God designed faith to be lived in community. If you don't have a nearby church, remember that this channel exists for that, to accompany and strengthen you on your spiritual journey. Sharing experiences, praying and learning together renews hope, and where there is hope, anguish cannot reign. It also helps to remember what God has already done for you. The enemy of trust is forgetfulness. That's why when the psalmist remembers God's works, his faith ignites again. Take a moment and write 3 things God has done in your life. A door that opened, a person who arrived at the right moment, a problem that seemed impossible but was solved. When you feel anxious again, read those words and let your heart remember that God is still the same. And finally, understand that trust is a process. Sometimes we want anguish to disappear overnight, and God can do it. But many times He chooses to teach us to trust little by little, strengthening our inner being. Each step you take in faith, even if small, makes you stronger. It's not about never feeling anguish again. It's about not letting it rule your life. Every day you choose to trust, faith grows, the mind clears, and the soul steadies. When you reach that point, you will discover something beautiful. God's peace doesn't depend on circumstances changing, but on your trust maturing. It is the same peace that guarded Daniel in the lion's den, that accompanied Joseph in prison, and that sustained Jesus in Gethsemane. That peace is real, available, and begins to manifest when you decide to believe more in what God can do than in what fear tells you. Part 2. When anguish rises strongly and it seems God is silent. There are days when the soul wakes up tired, even before opening your eyes. Days when worries wait at the door of your mind, ready to occupy every thought. And it is in those moments when trusting becomes most difficult, because everything you knew seems to shake and God's silence hurts more than the trials themselves. But it's precisely there where faith is tested and the heart is molded. Because trusting God isn't about doing so when everything is clear, but when there's nothing visible to confirm what you believe. God never promised a life without storms, but He did promise His presence amid them. And that promise is what sustains the believer when anguish screams loudest. Look at Job's life, for example. He lost his family, his health, his possessions, and yet he said, "Though He slay me, yet will I trust Him." He didn't say it from comfort, he said it from the ground. from brokenness. That's the kind of trust heaven rewards, the kind that doesn't depend on immediate results but on a deep knowledge of who God is. Sometimes God's silence isn't absence, it's strategy. God remains silent to teach you to hear what you couldn't before. His silence isn't punishment, it's part of spiritual growth. In that silence, faith learns to walk by conviction and not by emotion. It's as if God says, I taught you to trust when I speak. Now I want you to trust when I seem silent. And although the soul resists, that kind of faith builds a strength the enemy cannot break. It also helps to understand that anguish is not defeated by running from it, but by facing it with faith. It's not about ignoring pain, but looking it in the eye with the assurance that God is there. When Jesus was in Gethsemane, his soul was anguished to death, yet he prayed. He didn't avoid the moment. He faced it with prayer, surrender, and trust. He taught us that the human soul can suffer, yet yield to the divine will, and find in that surrender its victory. Another way to face those days when faith feels weak is to learn to speak to yourself as God would speak to you. The mind can become your worst enemy when you allow it to dictate thoughts of defeat, hopelessness, or doubt. But the believer has a stronger voice, the voice of the Spirit, reminding us of the promises. When your mind tells you that you can't go on, answer that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. When it says you're alone, remind it that God promised to be with you always, even to the end of the age. When it says there's no way out, declare that nothing is impossible for God. Speaking to yourself in faith is a spiritual act of resistance that keeps trust alive. It's also important to understand that trusting in God is not passivity, it's collaboration. Trust doesn't mean doing nothing and waiting for magic. It means doing what you can with faith and leaving what you can't in God's hands. If you can work, work. If you can pray, pray. If you can forgive, forgive. But when you reach your limit, rest. Mature faith knows when to act and when to stop. That wisdom only comes by walking with God and listening to His guidance daily. Another way to sustain trust is by looking at the whole story, not just the current chapter. When we're in pain, we tend to think that moment will last forever, but God is always writing beyond what we can see. Joseph was sold, betrayed, and imprisoned before seeing the purpose behind it all. If he had given up amid his anguish, he never would have reached the place God had for him. Sometimes what hurts today is exactly what God is using to open a path towards something greater. What makes you cry now might be the soil where your purpose will bloom tomorrow. It also helps to remember that faith is not measured by what you feel, but by what you choose to do despite what you feel. There will be days when you don't feel like praying, when your heart feels dry and your mind exhausted. But if on those days you still choose to kneel, close your eyes and say, Lord, I trust in you, that act is worth more than 1,000 words. God doesn't measure your faith by the absence of doubt, but by your decision to keep believing even with doubt present. Another powerful key is accepting that waiting is part of the miracle. God never arrives late. He arrives exactly when His purpose requires. Our impatience makes us think that if it doesn't happen soon, it won't happen at all. But if Scripture teaches us anything, it's that God's time is not our time. Abraham waited years to see his son. Moses wandered decades in the desert before seeing the promised land. And David was anointed king long before he sat on the throne. The waiting wasn't wasted, it was training. So if you are in a season where it seems God isn't moving, trust that He is preparing everything. You must also know that not everything that disturbs your peace comes from the enemy. Sometimes it's God moving you from a place where you can no longer grow. He shakes what is temporary to strengthen what is eternal. So when something falls apart, it's not always defeat. It may be liberation in disguise. Some doors God closes not as punishment, but as protection. When you understand that, anguish loses power because you learn to release what isn't yours and wait for what is. Another thing that helps maintain trust is recognizing small signs of divine presence in daily life. God doesn't only reveal Himself in great miracles, He also appears in details, a conversation that arrives right on time, a word that calms your heart, a situation that resolves unexpectedly. Each of these little lights is a reminder that you are not alone, that heaven is still working on your behalf, even when you can't see clearly. And finally, remember this. Trusting in God is not just a solution, it's a way of life. It's living with the certainty that even without all the answers, you are in the right hands. It's choosing to look beyond fear and see the faithfulness that has sustained you until now. Because if you are reading these words, it means God is still holding you, still has purpose for you, and still has plans that are not finished. Part 3. How to keep the peace you've gained and not return to the cycle of anguish. There's something many don't understand until they experience it. Anguish doesn't always disappear overnight. Sometimes it fades gradually, like a shadow dissolving with the morning light. But if we don't guard the peace God has given us, fear will knock again, stronger than before. That's why this part is so important, because it's not just about trusting God once, but learning to live in that trust every day as a habit of the soul. The first thing we must understand is that peace is a gift, but also a responsibility. Jesus said, He left us His peace, not as the world gives, but a deep peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. However, keeping it requires vigilance. The mind tends to return to old patterns, repetitive worries, exhausting thoughts. That's why every day you must remind yourself, today I choose to trust. Today I choose to rest in God. Today I choose not to carry what doesn't belong to me. That daily repetition transforms trust into a way of life. One of the most powerful ways to keep peace is by guarding what you listen to and consume. Anguish often feeds on the noise of the world. If your environment is filled with negativity, criticism, bad news, or conversations that breed fear, your faith weakens without you noticing. But when you choose to fill your mind with scripture, worship, and messages that strengthen your spirit, anxiety begins to lose ground. It's like a garden. If you water it with light and nourishment, it blooms. But if you let weeds grow, it withers. The same happens with the soul. It's also essential to learn to silence the inner noise. There is a quiet battle within us, the mind wanting to reason everything and the heart wanting to rest. Anguish often arises because we don't know how to stop thinking. But there is something you can do that changes your mental direction. Intentional silence. Yes, silence that is not empty, but full of presence. Take a few minutes each day to not talk, not think about problems, just be in God's presence. You don't need words. He already knows your thoughts. That act of stillness quiets the inner storm, and the soul remembers that not everything depends on it. Another way to preserve peace is through forgiveness. Yes, even though it may seem unrelated to anguish, forgiveness is a direct doorway to inner freedom. Many live in anxiety, not because of what they face today, but because of wounds they haven't released. Holding on to resentment is like carrying a stone in your heart, and no matter how much you try to trust God, that burden blocks true peace. Forgiving doesn't mean justifying what happened. It means freeing yourself from being a prisoner of that pain. When you decide to forgive, you tell God, I trust you to bring justice and heal my heart. That trust opens the path to a deeper peace than any explanation. It also helps to maintain a constant conversation with God. I'm not just talking about praying in hard times, but talking to Him throughout the day, telling Him what you feel, think, fear, and hope for. A living relationship with God doesn't rely on rehearsed phrases, but on honesty. The more you talk with Him, the more you recognize His voice in daily life. And the more you recognize His voice, the less space anguish has to speak. God's presence becomes so familiar that your soul learns to rest in it. And something very important, learn not to depend on what you see. Anguish always pushes you to look at what's visible, immediate, missing, or unfulfilled. But trust looks beyond, seeing the invisible, believing in what has not yet happened. That's what faith is, walking steadily on uncertain ground, knowing God holds what you cannot control. If you repeat this truth in your heart daily, you'll see how anguish loses strength. Because the soul that trusts doesn't need to understand everything. It only needs to remember that God never fails. Finally, there is one principle that changes everything: surrender. Not surrendering to pain, but to God. The difference is enormous. Surrendering to pain leaves you hopeless, but surrendering to God fills you with it. It's the moment when you recognize you can't rely on your own strength, but you know you don't need to. When you reach that point of surrender, peace no longer depends on what happens outside, but on what dwells within. And what dwells within is the presence of the one who calms storms with a single word. That's how you keep the peace you've gained, by guarding your thoughts, feeding your faith, embracing silence before God, forgiving what hurts, and remembering you are not alone. Anguish may try to return, but it cannot stay where faith stands firm. Every day you choose to trust, you are telling life itself, "My soul has found its refuge, and it is in God." Part 4. When anguish becomes purpose and pain turns into spiritual strength. There is something the soul only understands after passing through darkness. The hardest moments are not the end, they are the soil where God sows a new version of you. Anguish, though it hurts, has the ability to reveal who you are when you have nothing else to lean on. When everything external collapses, that is when the soul comes face to face with the eternal. And if you allow God to work in you in the midst of that process, what you feel today as a weight can become the greatest source of purpose and spiritual strength in your life. God does not waste suffering. Every tear, every sleepless night, every thought you believed no one would understand, has a place within the plan of the one who sees everything. What the enemy intended to use to destroy you, God takes and turns into an instrument for growth. That is how he works. He does not erase wounds as if they never existed. He transforms them into marks of victory. Joseph could look back and say to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God turned it into good." That sentence contains all the wisdom of the spiritual process. God does not always change circumstances immediately. He changes what they produce in you. Therefore, when you go through a time of anguish, ask yourself what God is forming in you through that pain. Maybe he is teaching you to depend less on your plans and more on his guidance. Or perhaps he is strengthening your patience, your empathy, your faith, or your capacity to comfort others. Nothing is lost when it is in his hands. Even the silence of God forms in you a deeper spiritual sensitivity, an ear capable of recognizing his voice in the details. It also helps to look at the stories of those who went through deep anguish and came out transformed. Moses had to flee to the desert before he could lead his people out. David was persecuted before he reigned. Elijah hid under a tree wishing to die before hearing God's voice in the gentle whisper. Each of them experienced anguish, despair, and doubt, but in the end, they discovered that season was necessary to prepare them. Anguish was not their end, it was their training. God brought them to a point where they could not trust anything but him, and there they discovered the power of an unbreakable faith. Another way to view this process is by understanding that God often uses pain as a mirror. In anguish, the things hidden in the heart are revealed: insecurities, dependencies, fears, false securities. Everything that once seemed stable is shaken, and what remains standing is what truly has deep roots. Sometimes we do not understand why we go through certain trials, but when the soul matures, it looks back and understands that without that breaking, it would not have found its true faith. The pain did not come to destroy you. It came to refine you, to remove the superficial, so that the eternal in you could shine. We must also recognize that every trial has a purpose that goes beyond ourselves. Sometimes the suffering you face is not only about your story, but about the impact your testimony will have on others. People who listen to you today do not connect with your successes, but with your scars. God allows you to live through difficult processes because he knows that one day your words will bring comfort to someone going through the same thing. Anguish becomes ministry, and tears turn into a message. What hurts you today may be exactly what God will use to heal others tomorrow. Another thing that turns pain into purpose is learning to give thanks even when you do not understand. It is not about giving thanks for the pain, but within the pain. That is one of the purest expressions of faith. When you can say to God, "I do not understand what you are doing, but I know you are good," you are affirming your trust in his character. And that declaration opens spiritual doors. Gratitude in the midst of suffering does not change God, it changes you. It causes the heart to release complaint and embrace hope. When you choose gratitude, anguish loses its power, because the soul begins to see beyond the pain. And something else you must know, God never leaves a story unfinished. It may seem like you are in the darkest chapter, but the ending has not been written by your fears, but by His promises. Every process has a divine conclusion. Every wound has a redemption. The problem is that sometimes we want to understand the story from the middle, when only God sees it complete. What looks like loss today may be the beginning of a restoration you cannot yet imagine. And when that moment arrives, you will understand that nothing was in vain. So when anguish returns, remember this: not everything that hurts is wrong. Sometimes pain is the sign that you are being shaped. When the potter works with the clay, he presses it, forms it, breaks it if necessary, but never abandons it. That is how God acts with you. If you feel everything is falling apart, it is not because He has left you. It is because He is preparing a more perfect form. Your task is not to resist His hand, but to trust His purpose. And when you learn to look at pain from that perspective, something powerful happens. Anguish becomes a teacher. It teaches you to see life with spiritual eyes, to value peace, to depend less on the world and more on God. You become wiser, more compassionate, stronger. What once brought you down now propels you forward. What once paralyzed you now launches you into your purpose. That is divine transformation, turning what seemed like a mortal wound into a source of life for you and for others. So if you are going through a season of anguish, do not despair. You are in the Master's workshop. He is working in you, refining, shaping, strengthening. And when He finishes, you will be a living testimony of His power. You will be able to look back and say, it was worth it to trust. Part 5. Recognizing the hand of God in the midst of anguish and learning to feel His comfort. One of the hardest things when going through a time of anguish is feeling the presence of God. The soul cries out, the heart prays, but it seems as though heaven is silent. And that sense of absence can be so painful that many think God has forgotten them. But the truth is that silence does not mean absence. God does not always show Himself with noise or grand signs. Many times His presence is manifested in what is subtle, small, easily overlooked if the heart is distracted. That is why in this part, I want you to learn to recognize traces of His hand in the midst of the process. Because when you manage to see that God has never left, the soul begins to rest. God comforts in ways the world does not understand. Sometimes He does it through a word that arrives just when you needed it, a song that seems written for you, or a person who says exactly what your heart did not know how to express. Other times He does it more deeply, with a peace you cannot explain, but that suddenly wraps you and calms your thoughts. That peace does not come from the outside, it comes from the inner certainty that even if you do not see the path, you are in the right hands. That is the silent voice of the Spirit reminding you that you are not alone. Another way God shows Himself is through small details. Do not underestimate the everyday, because He dwells there too. In a sunrise that makes you pause, in the fresh air after a difficult night, in a smile that returns a bit of faith to you. Sometimes we expect God to speak with thunder, but He prefers to speak in whispers. In 1 Kings, Elijah looked for God in the wind, in the earthquake, and in the fire. But God was in the gentle whisper. That lesson is eternal. You will not always find Him in the spectacular, but in the intimate. If you learn to see the simple with spiritual eyes, you will discover that God never left. You should also know that God's comfort does not always arrive when you expect it, but when He knows you are ready to receive it. There are times when everything seems to go dim, and just when you have no strength left to continue, something small happens and the soul breathes again. It was not coincidence, it was divine timing. God never acts late, even if from our perspective it seems delayed. His timing is exact, because He knows the measure of the heart. When everything seems lost, He sends a reminder of His love, and that one gesture is enough to renew hope. Another way to recognize His hand is to look back. When you pause to reflect on everything you have been through, you realize there were moments when you said you would not be able to go on, and yet here you are. That is evidence of God's power. It was not your strength, it was His faithfulness. How many times did you think there would be no way out, and yet life went on, doors opened, the heart healed. Every step you took was sustained by His grace. even if you did not notice it. Recognizing that not only fills you with gratitude, it also gives you confidence to face the present. Because if God sustained you before, He will sustain you now. It also helps to remember that God's comfort does not always feel the same. Sometimes it feels like an invisible embrace that calms your soul, but other times it manifests as correction, direction, or even waiting. And even if it hurts, that too is love. A father who loves does not always say yes, because his goal is not to merely please you, but to transform you. When you learn to receive His comfort, even when you do not understand His ways, you reach a more mature level of faith where trust does not depend on emotion, but on the character of God. Another important truth is that God comforts through His word. Verses are not just ancient phrases, they are living food. When you read the Bible with an open heart, there are words that leap from the page as if they were written just for you. That is not coincidence, it is the Spirit speaking directly to the soul. In moments of anguish, open the Scriptures, even if you do not feel like it. The wounded soul is healed by truth, not by distraction. Read the Psalms, because in them you will find men who also cried, doubted, and feared, but who ended by declaring the faithfulness of God. Every promise is a balm that penetrates deeper than any human counsel. Another way to recognize God's presence is in the processes of inner change. Perhaps you have not noticed how much you have grown in this time. Before you reacted with fear, now you choose to pray. Before you despaired, now you breathe and trust. That is evidence of the Spirit working in you. True comfort does not always show up by removing the problem, but by the change God produces within you. He is teaching you to live with peace, even while storms remain outside. That is the greatest miracle, to have calm in the midst of chaos. And something very powerful to remember is that God's comfort never runs out. You can go to Him again and again, and there will always be grace enough for a new day. His love does not grow tired. His faithfulness has no expiration date. Every morning is an opportunity to begin again, to renew trust, to believe that the story is not over. Even when you do not feel Him, He is working. Even when you do not see Him, He continues guiding your steps. And when you least expect it, what hurts you today will become a testimony of hope for others. That is how you recognize the hand of God, in the small, in the everyday, in the invisible. Do not expect to see fire or thunder. Seek His voice in the quiet, in the word that arrives right on time, in the peace that has no explanation. Divine comfort does not always remove the weight, but it gives you the strength to carry it with dignity. That is the difference between living in fear and living by faith.